Flow is the feeling of being in the zone, of having your entire attention focused on the task in front of you. Now, obviously, this kind of feeling, this psychological state, is very important if you're going to get work done. Obviously, if you're distracted, if you find your mind wandering, if you're jumping from place to place, it's going to be hard to get done work and it's going to be hard to focus. So flow and focus are nearly synonymous here when we're talking about how do you get quality work done. Now, this concept of flow as a psychological term was first pioneered by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist, and he found that one of the big determinants of whether or not you're in a flow is actually the difficulty of the task that you're facing. So essentially, if the task is too difficult, meaning that you find it frustrating, then what's going to happen is that you're going to interrupt. You're going to become self-conscious and you're going to interrupt your normal state of flow. On the other hand, if the task is too easy, if it requires not your full brain, but just a part of your brain in order to do it properly, then the other part of your mind is going to start wandering. It's going to start going to other places. It's going to start daydreaming. It's going to start getting distracted. So the real key then to being able to obtain a flow in your work is being able to take the tasks that you are provided, the things that you don't really have that much choice over what you're going to do, and modify their difficulty so that you can get into a flow more easily. So I want to talk about the two different ways that you can handle this problem. One is taking more difficult tasks and making them easier, and the other is taking easier tasks and paradoxically making them harder so that they'll be more enjoyable and you'll be able to achieve that flow. So let's start with difficulty first. Now this may seem like a tall order because after all, you don't get to choose what tasks you want to do. If the task is really, really hard, well, then it's just a really hard task. If it's frustrating, it's frustrating. How do you make a flow out of it when you don't get to choose the difficulty? You don't get to choose the task itself. So there's a few different things that you can do, and if you're deliberate about them, it can help you achieve a flow even if the task is extremely difficult. So the first is to slow it down. So one of the things is that frustration is often not inherent to the task, but it is dependent on your own expectations about how much progress you should be making. So writing an essay can be very frustrating if you think you should be doing 1,000 words an hour. However, if your goal is only to produce a sentence an hour, well, suddenly the task has become much, much easier, even though it was very frustrating to begin with. So one thing to do in your work is notice when you're getting frustrated and ask yourself, do I need to deliberately slow this down? Do I need to lower my expectations and go through this more slowly? Now, sometimes you might have pressure from your boss, from deadlines, from knowing you need to study this to reach an exam. But I think the important idea here is that you're probably not going to get any more done outside of a flow than within it. So this is a little bit of a psychological trick. Even though you feel a lot of pressure and expectation to do things at a certain speed, you're not going to get them done if you're not in a flow state. You're not going to get them done if you're constantly distracted, frustrated, really stressed out about it. So in this case, slowing it down may be paradoxically the way to actually do it faster, the way to actually get it done on time. So slow things down. That's the first step. The second is to break it up. Very often what makes a task difficult is its complexity. So that there can be something that you have so many things you have to keep in mind at once in order to accomplish it that it's overwhelming. That taking our example again of writing that essay, writing an essay can be very daunting because you don't know where to start, you don't know what your thesis is going to be, what you should research, what words should I use here. It can all feel very overwhelming. Similarly, if you're doing a programming problem, you might be trying to solve a programming problem. You're like, you know what, I have no idea how to do this. It's so frustrating. Nothing is working. Break it down into smaller parts. So instead of trying to solve the problem all at once, pick some aspect of the sub-problem. So it could be choosing a topic to write your essay on, or reading one of the books that you need to do for research. Or if it's your programming problem, it could be, you know what, let's figure out what this error message means rather than let's debug the entire program all at once. Breaking it down into more concrete components that you focus on individually, again, lowers the difficulty, increases the chance of flow. And the final one sounds like a bad idea, but it often works really well. And again, it has this paradoxical psychological quality, which is lower the quality of your work, lower your expectations. And this is one of the things that can often happen. A sense of perfectionism, a sense of having really high expectations can infiltrate your work and make it hard to have that kind of quality. So one way of doing it is just produce bad work, produce work that is not up to standard. Now, I know you can't always do this in every situation, so sometimes you have to stick to breaking things up or doing things in a slower fashion. But if you lower your quality threshold, you can often get to that output level. So one thing I'm doing when I'm writing is often I'll be very nitpicky about, well, this isn't very good. This article I'm writing right now, this video I'm recording right now, it's not very good. I should do something better. However, if I just get myself to just output it, often the end result of actually doing it is not so bad. It's, you know what, it's actually better than I thought it was going to be. And the reason why is because when we are outputting work in a flow state, we're often doing fairly high quality work or nearer to the highest quality work that we can do. Maybe it's not at the level of deliberate practice or at the level of reaching that extreme bleeding edge of our ability, but it's usually in the upper portion of what we can accomplish. So by lowering your expectations, lowering what you want to achieve in terms of quality, you can often increase your actual output, get to that flow state, and produce something that was probably close to the best you could have done anyways. So these are 3 ways to make a task easier. How about making it harder? Well, this is again something that's not so easy to do, because if a task is really simple, how do you make it less simple? How do you make it in a way that's going to actually command your attention? So again, this is often in the same way a reverse of the advice that I just gave. So one way is to up your game. So if one of the things was to lower your quality, one way is to increase your quality expectation. So if something's become really routine, really boring for you, how can you be more perfect about it? How can you make your standards even higher? Another example is to raise the stakes. One of the things that defines your attention is your sense of stress or general arousal. So if you have low arousal, if you're sleepy, for instance, it's going to be hard to pay attention because your bodily arousal is not allowing your attentional faculties to focus on what you need to. In contrast, if you raise the stakes by giving yourself a little bet, or you give yourself a little contest, or you're trying to hit a certain target in a certain amount of time, that pressure, that increased pressure is going to increase your arousal, increase your attention, and make it easier to focus. And the final way to do it is to do things differently. So often what makes something routine is that we've mastered the motor commands for executing it to the point where we don't really need to think about it. So it's all automatic. It's all using a very small portion of our brain that's been trained to do that exact task. So an easy way to get out and do that is to do it differently than you did it before. So if normally you were doing the task one way, try doing it backwards or try doing it a different way. Very often this can be useful even for the purposes of raising quality, not just for improving with flow. So one friend of mine who is an excellent public speaker told me that some useful advice that he got was when he was practicing his speech to do it in a lot of different ways. So do it one way where he's yelling, do it one way where he's whispering, do it one way where he's doing it in a different accent. And the reason why is that trying all these different things out actually shakes up your habits so that it's easier to reapproach the same speech without some of the same tics and behavioral flaws that you had before. So think about this. When you're approaching your work and you find it really hard to get into a flow, ask yourself, is it too hard or too easy? If it's too hard, slow it down, break it up, and lower your quality. If it's too easy, up your game, raise the stakes, and do things differently.